Hello and welcome to News in Depth on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Sweden has voted to lift a years-long moratorium on uranium mining, a move that could reshape the country's energy strategy and strengthen Europe's search for energy independence. Joining me to discuss the geopolitical and security implications of these developments is Adam Jasser. He is news director at TVP World. Adam, welcome back. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
So, about 40% of Sweden's energy comes from nuclear sources. Electricity comes from. They've got 6 nuclear plants already, and they're simply digging up their own uranium. What's the problem? Why is there such a hullabaloo about this?
Is there?
Well, yes. I mean, they had a moratorium on it.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think Sweden, perhaps faster than some other countries, has realized that the Pax Americana in the form we knew it is gone. That some new order is emerging, where security threats are more acute, and where global idea of peace and prosperity for everybody and smooth cooperation is over. And energy independence, as you rightly pointed out, is one key area. And this is not the only thing that happened this week, because also this week the European Union decided to water down, let's say, some of its ambitious climate agenda, because there are other challenges: security, defense, industrial capacity and independence. So independence, self-reliance are back, and perhaps some of the more ambitious long-term goals that were valid only a few years ago, particularly before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, are going to the back burner.
Right, so we're seeing a bit of tension between accessing resources like uranium and the climate goals that the European Union set for itself. Which direction do you think Sweden is taking? And do you believe that actually digging up your own uranium is going to help them?
Yeah, well, obviously, you know, it's always better to dig your own natural resources than to rely on somebody else's. Yeah. You know, Germany discovered it the hard way when it comes to Russian gas, despite warnings from Poland and other Central European nations that Germany was becoming too dependent. Germany, incidentally, also got rid of its nuclear power and now is scrambling to keep their industrial base powered by cheap electricity. Yeah. So, you know, I think you rightly said at the beginning that it's also a question of geopolitics, of shifting trends. I mean, we saw China suddenly blocking supply of rare earth materials to the United States, but also to Europe. And so much of our industry, European industry and US industry, depends on these deliveries. As a matter of fact, these rare earths, this is not rocket science. This is actually a very dirty business. You dig in rock, in sand, and you pick particles. And the value of this entire segment of the economy, of the global economy, is not huge. We're talking about tens of billions of euros, but it's a choke point for the entire economy because they go into smartphones, into electronics, into chips, into household products. All of this is dependent on this relatively small market that China has monopolized because the West ignored geopolitical risks. So the Swedes are in a sense showing that when the circumstances change, we change policy, and I think that there is a lesson for that.
Well, I think so.
For everybody in that.
I think most would agree with you, because previously Sweden has got its uranium supplies from the US, fine, but Kazakhstan and Russia until the sanctions bit. So certainly the last two are a little bit risky for Sweden. Now there are, of course, protests, as you might expect, in Sweden, you know, about reversing this moratorium. Do you believe that basically the realpolitik, the geopolitics, the security considerations are going to force this reverse through? Or do you think that...
I think it's a done deal.
It's a done deal.
I think that despite the protests, the logic of Swedish and European security when it comes to energy is paramount. But it's not just that. I mean, Sweden has this tradition of neutrality going back, 2 centuries. Since the Napoleonic Wars, they've been neutral, and they joined NATO. And Finland has nuclear power, never gave up nuclear power. So now the 2 Nordic countries that are on the eastern flank of NATO, they're both going after nuclear. And I think many viewers probably don't realize that, but Sweden in the 60s, in 1960s, had a very advanced nuclear armaments program as well. This was before the non-proliferation treaty, which stopped the spread of nuclear weapons, came into force in the 70s. In the late 50s and in the 60s, Sweden was very close to having their own tactical nuclear weapon because their technology was dual. It was for energy, but they were also able to enrich plutonium, which is required for nuclear arms. They had this capacity. It came very close to that. And it didn't happen because, as you rightly pointed out, domestic opposition to this was huge from society at large. It didn't fit the Scandinavian Swedish model, if you will. But it also was the result of US pressure, because the US was then negotiating the non-proliferation treaty. And it was also the cost, because it would have cost 10% of the entire defense budget of Sweden. So in the end, this nuclear program was abandoned. But I think there is something symbolic in the fact that now they are going to, not only they will continue having nuclear power capacity, but they are going to enrich uranium. And I think it's a powerful political signal.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask, I mean, this change, and it's happening not only in Sweden, but a shift in the attitude in Europe towards nuclear weaponry. There's been talk, for example, of the French providing a nuclear umbrella for the European Union. So there's what's been described as a nuclear renaissance. Do you believe, I mean, Sweden has quite an advanced armaments industry already. Do you believe that this uranium enrichment is actually dual purpose, and Sweden wants to be in a position where if they see things getting too hot, they can be the third European nuclear power?
I think this is, we should not allow our imagination to carry us away too far. But, you know, dual use is a matter of fact. You know, once you've got nuclear reactors and you have the capacity to enrich uranium, at some point, you know, it may be easier for you, were you to take that step. At the moment, there is no indication that this is the case. But you also have to look at what you mentioned, that, you know, we had a string of events recently that are worrisome from the point of view of nuclear arms, because we saw Russia testing new delivery systems for nuclear arms. President Trump of the United States saying the US will resume testing nuclear weapons. It is not entirely clear if he means returning to testing by actually detonating nuclear devices, or whether he's talking about weaponry capable of delivering. And Putin responded by saying, you know, we need to explore the possibility of testing. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a huge outcry, or maybe response, when Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, I think at the beginning of this year, he said in an interview somewhere in America that if US allies around the world will start doubting whether the US commitment to their defense is as solid as it used to be, then there is a number of countries that could seek their own nuclear deterrent. And at that time, he was challenged. So is Poland thinking about it? And he said, I was thinking about, I think he said, you know, South Korea, for obvious reasons. North Korea has nuclear weapons, and Japan for the same reason. But, you know, the discussion about Poland's participation in, let's say, nuclear sharing when it comes to defense, it keeps coming and going. So obviously this is a topic, and given how fragile the overall situation is, we will be hearing more about this.
Indeed. Strategically speaking, we shall see in which direction countries within Europe go. Because, as you say, Donald Trump has extracted himself a little bit from what many see as the US responsibility of nuclear protection. And so countries are taking up that mantle for themselves. Poland, Sweden, maybe two examples. There's a little soundbite I'd like to share. It's from a guest who was talking about the big picture in terms of nuclear weaponry. Let's watch that and I'll get your take on it.
The countries, there are 9 countries that have these nuclear weapons. But overwhelmingly, and we're talking about almost 90%, are in the arsenals of Russia and the United States. These 2 countries are the ones that have, by far, the most nuclear weapons. And that has always been the case. So part of it is because of their experience with the Cold War, the role in the arsenals they developed at the time, the strategies, et cetera, et cetera. You'd have to drop quite significantly before you get to the next level, and that is China, which we think is, well, so let me just back up here and say, so the nuclear arsenals of Russia and the United States, they include, for Russia's, in Russia's case, just over 4,000, we think something in the order of 4,300 nuclear weapons. The United States a little lower, about 3,700 nuclear weapons in their arsenal. And both of these countries also have significant numbers of retired weapons awaiting dismantlement. From that, you go down to countries like Britain and France that both have around 200 plus 250 to 300 nuclear weapons. And so then you get to India, Pakistan. They have around 170 or so nuclear warheads each. And from that, you go down to Israel, that we think maybe have some just under 100, perhaps 90 nuclear warheads. And then the lowest on the list is North Korea. We think they have something in the order of about perhaps 50 nuclear warheads.
Now, when he lays it out like that, that looks a little bit scary, because you can visualize, can't you, all these nuclear weapons all over the world. And we're not used to thinking of it in that big picture way. Let's start with Russia. He says that they have about 4,000 of these things. A few days ago, you were talking to Foreign Minister Sikorsky, and he said that Putin has basically painted himself into a corner where he can't stop the war without losing power. And so he's a bit stuck. Now, he's got 4,000, he's got his finger on the button, 4,000 nukes. Do you think that trap that he currently finds himself in could push him towards, at the very least, tactical nukes in Ukraine?
The use of tactical nuclear weapons is something that is very often talked about. Nobody really can anticipate how it unfolds, but surely starting this would potentially cause a chain reaction. I'm sorry for this metaphor, but that would be a gamble. When you're talking about these 4,000 nuclear devices, I mean, some of them are, of course, long-ranged, so they're not tactical, they're strategic. So, you know, President Trump and President Putin seem to be talking a lot about nuclear these days. And we've seen throughout the latest few years during the conflict, during Russia's war in Ukraine, that Russia has a tendency to rattle the nuclear saber whenever things don't go their way. So, you know, I don't want to sound too alarmist, and I think it's still most of the time saber rattling. But in this febrile environment, you know, mishaps can happen, miscalculations can happen. So I don't know if I answered your question. So I don't think Putin will consciously try to use nuclear weapons, but there may be some form of escalation or provocation or accident that will trigger something more
I think the
serious.
concern really is about how desperate he becomes, because, there are murmurings, even amongst the elite in the Kremlin, that actually this war was a mistake. We hear about the Putin's mouthpieces kind of threatening nuclear Armageddon every 5 minutes. But one gets a sense that he may be getting a little more desperate.
Well, that's why Mr. Sikorski, who, as you said, we interviewed him yesterday, he said, we're not interested in regime change in Russia. So in other words, the West is not trying to project an image that they are interested in toppling Mr. Putin, because, as you rightly pointed out, that could be for him a pretext to do something drastic. So yes, it's a tricky situation for the world. But in a sense, President Trump, he said many times that he sees the nuclear threat as something he wants to tackle. He takes credit for stopping he claims credit for stopping the confrontation between India and Pakistan recently. And he said, we would have had a nuclear confrontation there. There's no evidence that would indeed happen, but he's conscious of that, and he's talking about nuclear disarmament. But in a sense, he's also right that, if the Russians are escalating, then he also needs to respond with escalation. That's why I think he mentioned this testing in response to Russia as a way of signaling to Putin that, we're not going to be left behind in this.
Yeah. In fact, it's interesting you mentioned that, because we have that clip where Donald Trump is talking on a 60-minute CBS interview. I think that should be coming up in just a second.
Well, we have more nuclear weapons than any other country. I think we should do something about denuclearization. And I did actually discuss that with both President Putin and President Xi. We have enough nuclear weapons to blow up the world 150 times. Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons, and China will have a lot. They have some, they have quite a bit.
So
but
why do we need to test our nuclear weapons?
Well, because you have to see how they work. You do have to. And the reason I'm saying testing is because Russia announced that they were going to be doing a test. If you notice, North Korea is testing constantly. Other countries are testing. We're the only country that doesn't test, and I don't want to be the only country that doesn't test.
Are you saying that after more than 30 years, the United States is going to start detonating nuclear weapons?
I'm saying that we're going to test nuclear weapons like other countries do, yes.
But
Now, Trump has been...
You see, this is the ambiguity. And I think that ambiguity is on purpose.
Right.
So he's not confirming that they will be detonating nuclear devices. He's just saying, others are testing, we're going to be testing.
I think we should, etc., etc. Which perhaps suggests, because, many have accused Trump of being too soft with Putin, being kind of led by the nose by Putin. Do you think this is a kind of a final, I'm putting my foot down on the ground saying enough is enough, I'm now imposing some kind of control over this conversation?
I think in principle, Donald Trump still believes that he can bring Putin to reason. But he has been disappointed. He made two offers that actually were pretty good for Putin, because he would have kept parts of the Donbass that the Russian army holds, and Putin twice rejected that, sticking to his maximalist agenda. So I think Donald Trump is realizing that the warnings he has been hearing for many, many years that Putin is not prepared for peace, he's finally seeing this, he's seeing through this. But I still think he believes that ultimately he will bring Putin to the table.
To the negotiating table. Well, we shall see. So many moving pieces to this jigsaw. Adam, thank you very much for helping us make some sense of it.
Well, I hope I helped.
You certainly did. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of News in Depth. Don't go away, though. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.